peace is only one goal, which is 100% human factor. There is nothing here about the natural causes of this, of peace, or justice, or weak institutions. This is human cause. So it has to be a social approach, a social way of addressing it. We look at, if we don't have peace, it's not because it's natural, it's a human cause. There are so many factors which we can consider. And science and technology is one of the issues which can address this injustice. But for me, before I answer your question, I see lack of peace as no or less or little involvement of our youth. The wars which are being fought on the continent or in other parts of the globe is because our youths have got nothing to do. They've got full of energy, they've got a lot of time, and then somebody comes around the corner with his or her own objective, brings a machine gun, gives it to our youth, and gives him $100. We have lost our peace. So for us to address the issue of peace, I think we should address the use of engaging our youths to make sure that they get involved from the beginning. They are not lying idle there. They don't find comfort in holding a machine gun. They don't feel injustice because of what's happening. And they've got strong institutions support their cause. So science and technology can come here as very handy, in which our youths will be involved in science, doing research, come up with innovations we are talking about here, come up with entrepreneurial activities which are science-based. They are occupied, they are busy, they've got no time for everything. But also, this youth is holding a machine gun, that's science and technology. We should be careful how the science and technology can be implemented to kill the peace we want to produce, the peace we want to build. It is very clear that if science and technology falls into the wrong hands, it can be detrimental to the peace, justice, and strong institution we want to create. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I agree with you completely, but there's another aspect of the question. How can science and technology contribute to peace and inclusive society?
How can science and technology improve peace? Like I was saying, for me, peace is normally something which comes out because someone is idle. If we give our youth something to do, we give them enough base for them to do research, for them to do science, to do innovation, they will produce innovation that will contribute to the development of the society, not to the destruction of the society. For me, I think the science and technology can actually bring in the ideas we would want to have and have peaceful situation on our continent.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Can we have your opinion, Mr. Tonia?
Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity, ma'am. Well, I'll speak more because of my background and where I come from. I'm from a media side, an online media side of things, where we find ourselves half of the time we are the people who are peddling news and information to the society and the community. So my background is I'm an online media editor and an entrepreneur as well, as a president of an online content creators association here in Zimbabwe called ZOG. So we often speak about this issue of how do we then play a pivotal role to make sure that peace is sustained through what we do as media players. And because we run the biggest association as far as online news and information dissemination is concerned, you find that at the other side of the same coin, we are the main culprits because of what we call fake news. People peddle fake news because of many different issues. And this has detrimental effects to the way the society and the ecosystem is being run each and every single day. Where you find that half the time you find that PR companies and associates, they're finding so much time to fight and try and reverse the fake news, the lies, the propaganda, and the information that people push through. And they do it for many various reasons. And I think top amongst these issues are people just peddling news because they enjoy hits and they enjoy clickbaits, and they are then becoming the same people that are the major causes of, infights and the confrontations that are then being driven by what we produce, mainly because of what we do professionally as online content creators and as media players and people. So we often speak about how best then do we look into this as not just as a problem that we should fight and see going out, but also as professional media players that needs to stand for the values that drive the truthfulness of information, accurate information, and credible information. And it also goes beyond us on how far technology can also come through and help promote peace. I think there's been a lot of traction that has been going on as far as the online social media platforms are also driving towards verifying fake news, deregistering of fake accounts, and there's a lot more on how people can then be helped and could be assisted to also try and identify fake accounts, fake news, and fake information before people get to believe this, because we strongly feel it destabilizes the society before people get to believe the information.
Absolutely true. I would like to do this session a little bit different because all the panelists are here. So I will also want to take contributions from the floor. Yes, sir?
I'd like to contribute to the question on the issue of peace and science. At the global level, there is an area called science diplomacy. Countries may not like each other, but sometimes they may have issues together. For example, now, we have the issue of coronavirus, right? Even if two countries have a problem, but they are facing coronavirus, their scientists have to work together. So there have been situations during the Cold War where Russia and the US, although they were having problems, but their scientists had to work together on issues. For example, if two countries have a shared resources, it could be a water, it could be a biodiversity, like for example Rwanda and Uganda and Congo, they share the Virunga mountain, where they have the Gorilla Mountains. Even during the period where there were challenges between the three countries, actually, even country between Rwanda and Congo, still the scientists on both sides have to meet because they have to do the conservations of the gorilla, and the gorilla was a major resource to that. So these are the issues that is there. At the continental level also, we are seeing issues related to water, for example, along the Nile, about building a dam. Ethiopia, and we see the other countries around, and of course Egypt and other. Scientists could be able to say, if you build a dam there, will that disturb the water system? So the knowledge can be very important in this issue. But at a national level, and long term for a nation, it is important to have a scientific culture. A culture of questioning, of critical thinking. This is something that is very, very important. During the genocide in Rwanda, they will ask you, go and kill somebody, and you take the machete, you don't even ask a question. So critical thinking is very important. So during the time of the reconstruction at least I was Minister of Education from 2001 to 2006, where we teach the children, the notion of questioning somebody asks you to do something, you ask why, and the person has to explain to you. So scientific approach to issues actually help to build relations. This is something that has to be done, of course, for a long term. But if we take, for example, the issue of primary education, if a country has 50% of the children that are not in school, if the enrollment is 50%, where are the other 50%? They are going to grow, they are going to be teenagers, where are you going to put them? As my colleague there from ICSU said, those children, at some point, they will go to rebels. You have the rebel movement, they're going to go as child soldier. So already, by putting children in primary school, you are building the future for a nation. So when I was Minister of Education, in 2001, with the Education for All, we said no child in the street, because those children, if they're in the street, they're going to be a problem. So when I left as a minister, we probably put 1 million children more in school than they couldn't. This means if you calculate, we will be having in every small community 100 child in the street. This means by doing that, you are creating a problem for the future. So primary education is central to the long-term peace of a country. Of course, in the meantime, if you teach critical thinking, you teach basic science, because science comes with it, reasoning becomes very, very important. So for long term, as we are building the path for the future for the continent, it is important to come back to the basic primary school. Every child has the right to go to education, but he has also the right to the basic scientific education.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for that contribution. Now to go through any other contribution from the floor. Pardon? You want to say something? Okay.
Okay, I think I really want to put a whole lot, especially in the media now, like you talked about. I think the major thing is actions and string actions, like punishment, need to be meted out to those that are responsible, especially for this fake news. Something happened way back in Nigeria, just some weeks back. A governor-elect who was supposed to be sworn in the next day. A day before he sworn in, he was sacked by this apex court in Nigeria. And after that happened, the party he's from, the party chairman came up and then made some ridiculous statement like nobody was going to be sworn in again. And then immediately after doing that, in less than a few days after he finished saying this, there was some killings in some communities believed to be those that are taken to these words that he has said. How? He came on air and then made some statements. So I think we really need to be very watchful about those that peddle this news. We really need to be very watchful about the channels they use. Let's look back, way back, when I was a kid. I could remember if my dad wanted to send messages back home to my grandmom, he needed to write a letter and had to wait for days before this thing get delivered. But then technology has made it a whole lot easier. Within the next second, the next person millions of miles away from you knows what he needs to know. But then I think the very thing is this medium that this is being perpetrated really needs to be watched. This medium that this is being perpetrated we really need to be careful about it. Especially for those of us that have, especially for these countries that still have maybe very early democracy, or they are just trying to get back from a war zone. I also want to talk about the education you talked about, Minister. I think it is high time we start looking. I liked what the Minister of Tertiary Education talked about today. We need to start designing education for us, education that is going to help us, and not education that is going to just make us speak very good English, and it cannot put food in your on your table, it cannot provide for you. Instead, after you're done going to school, you come out and you're just good English speaker, you're coming out to become employees and not becoming employers. We need to start having critical thinking. We need to start having this from a different perspective. I think this is really going to be very helpful in a whole lot of things we're doing.
Thank you very much. Absolutely true. There's a saying that an idle mind is a devil's workshop. When these kids are not in school, they get attracted to others. That's why we have so many kids in the insurgents group. So there's absolutely need. Yes, it is true that science and technology can contribute to peace, but at the same time, it can lead to other things. For instance, like what he's saying in terms of fake news. We all know what happened during the Arab Spring. It was the use of social media, the technologies that we have. And before you know it, the news just goes wild, and then people take to the street. That brings us to the next question that we're going to be asking, and that is to what are the legal and regulatory mechanisms that we can put in place to ensure that science and technology is being harnessed effectively and efficiently. I will start with you, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you. I think what we need are policies that will protect the nations. We need strong institutions that can handle issues beyond their borders. We need continental and regional institutions that will be able to contain situations. Now, if you look at a situation where we have refugees, now most cases you talk about refugees, we talk about children, we talk about women. But in that group of refugees, there are scientists who left their labs, and they are also part of the refugees. Do we have some kind of mechanisms to help these scientists to come out of that situation and continue doing their research? When the war is over, do we have national programs to attend or to address these issues after the war, the post-war, post-conflict activities? Do we have policies? Sometimes it's a nation. They will be hit hard. They will need strong institutions outside their borders to help them to go through and make sure that they can come up with something. They can talk or look back and say, we have been there, but this is where we are. So I think in this case, we look at options we should have, directions we should take. But here, I think it's more than a nation. Because if a nation is at war, the solution normally does not come from within. It comes from outside. Do we have mechanisms in place? Do we have institutions in place? Do we have resources in place? Do we have people who can say, after the war, we can help you to build your nation?
Romeo? Antonio? What are the legal and regulatory mechanisms that we can put in place to ensure that we are harnessing science and technology effectively?
Well, I'll stick to my lane on how best we can implement regulatory laws to make sure that the media on our side effectively does not warrant or neither does it drive issues that destabilizes peace. I think one of the most interesting development that has been happening, like he has already said, speaking on the ISIS wars and the wars that we've been having, I strongly feel that even the Egypt evolution, there's been so much warfare that has been happening today, nowadays, more on the social and the digital age than it has been happening anywhere else physically. And this has been driven by people and shadow groups that then come up with institutions that nobody else knows, and they have their own self-perceived agenda that then destabilizes regions and causes a lot of destabilizations across nations. And the strongest move that we can follow, I think, in terms of regulatory, to answer your question, is what we have seen Facebook and most international organizations are actually doing today as far as policy regulation against people who are peddling falsehoods, fake news, And the laws that have now been put through, I think recently Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg has been appearing before the United States Congress, whereby he has been challenged to make sure that there are certain statutes and standards that then help the nation to work against ISIS and any possible groups that are illegal and that can destabilize any nations. So these are legal frameworks that have been put through. We have seen it on Twitter and as well on Facebook, whereby they are now deregistering all these accounts. So these are legal measures that I strongly feel that they need to be taken and they need to be seriously monitored so that we do not just allow the internet to become the tool that we use and we are not cognizant of the negativities that can be used against us. I strongly feel that the internet is a good tool. It's a weapon that we can all use. But like the old statement says, guns do not kill people. People kill people. We can't then have harsh rules against the internet because we're having people who are not utilizing it in the proper manner. What you need to do is we have to have people who fully embrace it, understand how it works, and we use self-regulatory measures first as organizations and as consumers, more importantly, to be able to be empowered and decipher what kind of information should be received, should be peddled, and which we should also receive before we even start propagating or pushing to other groups. I think the biggest enemy of this as well is us as normal human beings. We do not know or care to think twice before we start pushing information that you yourself would have doubted the first time. But we have this same information doing rounds on WhatsApp groups, online. People get to share this. But I strongly think that we also become responsible for the same messages if we are also careless not to be just cognizant of basic rules to say, well, how true or how far-fetched would this information be before I start peddling as well and I start spreading it through. So instead of us just calling in for harsh laws and regulations to say those accounts should be closed or anything else, I think we also need to also play a very positive and subconscious role so that we are also not part and parcel of the same problem that we are creating.
Thank you. Just to add to what you have said, two of you have said, talking about technology and innovation, I don't know about Zimbabwe, but I find that, lots of African countries will have a lot of technologies and innovations coming into the country. And the question is, do we really have some policies, some regulations, to check the impact, environmental impact of these technologies on the continent? Because I suppose that the issue of regulation should be to protect the society and the consumer. Do we really, what kind of mechanisms do we need to put in place? Do we have things like registration of knowing who is doing what, who is bringing what into the society, into the country, and, a form of registration and monitoring the impact of these kind of technologies? Yes, Honorable.
The question is complicated and multidimensional, depending how you take it. Of course, the internet, as a new technology and any new technology and new science, in particular new technology, has always a double sword. It's a knife with two sides. So that's said it is that. But coming on the issue related to slander, in the issue related to fake news, we have entered into the era of digital technology without being prepared. So this means that, for example, countries in the developing world in general don't have data protection. For example, if you are in Europe, you have what you call a directive on data protection. Very important. This means you have a commissioner on data protection. So your data, it is like your money. It is your belonging. So this means that your data belongs to you. You can use it. Somebody, for example, if you go to the doctor, they ask you to sign a paper on privacy. Because once you give that data, automatically it's not protected. So, but of course, if you want to protect the data, you need to find a way to subpoena a data, for example. Don't forget that an email, for example, an email is like a letter. It goes to the post. A letter goes to the post office, and you pick it. A letter goes to the ISP, Internet Service Provider. It is downloaded there. Actually, people can read your email, even before it gets to you. People used to say, no, Professor Morenzi, no, it's my email. Nobody will have it. No. Some guy can see your email. You see my point? So this means that when you send an email to somebody and there is fake news in that, what is the responsibility of that email? It has the same responsibility as a letter in front of the law. However, the laws of the country in general have not been updated to link with the data of the digital era. That's something that has to be done in general, but it has not been done. The whole issue of privacy is very, very important. That thing also has not been done. Coming back to the issue that you just said, new technologies coming, for example, into a country. Most countries, they have what they call the equivalent of a Bureau of Standards. If you bring like a new marketable technology, the Bureau of Standards can look at it and make the choice or do something on that. However, sometimes countries don't have the Bureau of Standards don't have the capacity actually to evaluate those technologies on those products coming in. Don't forget that a product is not only a tangible product like an apple or a shirt. A product can be a software, can be a genetic material. A product can be so in that sense, actually countries, they have that, but sometimes they don't have the capacity actually to filter out. Their staff don't have that capacity. This is something that we should consider. But coming back to the previous question on the issue of technology and peace, if you look at the youth of the continent or the youth in a particular country, one can talk about vocational training. Because there are many technologies there for the people who are between probably 15 and 18 or 20, who didn't go to school, who don't have any other skills. There is a way actually to give them massive education in vocational training, because these kids who are between 15 and 20, so many of them, they're going to live another 20 years, another 25 years. This means that if you don't train them, it becomes a problem. So vocational training at a massive level could be essential to respond to the question of our colleague from ICSU, if these refugees or in the refugee camp or these child soldiers who have been demobilized, what do you do with them? I think one can think about a large, massive vocational training program. My father was a carpenter. Until the age of 13 and 14, I could make 14 chairs during the vacation of the summer or Christmas. When I was at the university, I didn't have a scholarship because I was a refugee, Rwanda refugee in Burundi. During the vacation, I would make my own chairs to be able to pay my schooling. But the only thing I did was just watch my father working. It doesn't require any other thing. So this means that having these children in working with carpenters, working with plumbers, they can learn a lot, and they can have in their life, and that can change the society. That can change. But if you do at the level of every country, at the level of the continent, you make a huge change.
Good evening. My contribution is in form of a question. I would like to ask the panel if it is possible for science and technology to be used to counter conventional threats to peace, such as the UFOs and unidentified flying objects. Is science and technology possible to counter these threats because they have been a threat to the direction of international peace and security? So is it possible for us to use science and technology to counter these threats that are coming in form of UFOs?
Okay, thank you for that question. Panelists, did you get the question? will you want to respond? Even though we are not at the level of, but let's take the question.
Yes.